Welcome to Dysregulated. As always, my name's Josh. I'm here with Jeff and Vince. And today we're reminding the wounded, you're not the problem. Just the proof it's time for the system to change.
Little story time, one that's near and dear to my heart, and we'll call this story No Finish Lines. So let's go a couple months back, and that puts me about a year into my first year of traditional therapy. And when I say traditional, I mean being in an office, mostly conversation-based. I know that, I do have the, privilege of being able to do some movement-based therapies with clients, but, people don't come in looking for that. And so I meet them where they're at. And after a year, I found myself very, very angsty. I was beginning to dysregulate, but I'm being told I'm doing good work. I have a full book. Clients are telling me that they're feeling better in ways, but yet there's new things that arise week to week, right? And I'm over here and I'm starting to struggle with my sense of accomplishment. I'm saying, I'm not helping these people. The finish lines keep moving. And I start to realize about myself, like, is this a me problem? Like, do I really need these finish lines? Or is it the system, right? Like, is it just that we're trying to support coping forever, right? And so I start to have this existential crisis as it applies to my career. And, in that moment, I remember walking into Jeff's office and telling him, I said, my clients, the better the work I do, they're not letting me finish my job. They want to stay. It's maybe it's the connection. I'm trying to find a way to frame it positively. And it's interesting because in the end, it was faith and realizing that I have this amazing opportunity as a clinician to provide help to far more people than the average person. And for that, I don't need finish lines. But it still leaves the system. It still leaves their side in terms of how can we make this better? How can we be results driven? How can we look to resolve instead of just cover up? But in ways we don't need finish lines, in the nature of our urge to help as professionals, but we do need finish lines if they're going to go live an optimal life.
Mm-hmm. So this hits near and dear to you and your upbringing as a baby clinician all the way up to where you are now.
Absolutely.
However many years later. That's awesome. So I want to preface this episode by saying we are not anti-med. We're not anti-therapy. There is a reason that these are such popular modalities of treatment because they work in a lot of ways, right? And this kind of goes back to the paradigm shift. The reason we call this a paradigm shift is because I think you mentioned it a couple episodes ago, Jeff. There's a hole that most of the field would agree, if not all the field. And you kind of look at it and you're like, man, it's there, but I don't really know what to do about it. This is our proposal on what to do about it.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, I hear you have a story for us too about roofing.
Yeah.
Elaborating a little bit on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, this goes back a lot to my personality, my training, my background. And, and just kind of jokingly, I said beforehand with these guys, I'm like, okay, I'm really nervous. I think I said this at the last podcast. I'm a little nervous about this because I don't like criticizing things apart from giving constructive criticism that results in something that fixes the system, right? So, as we go into this session and this topic on what's wrong with the system, I really want to come into this with humility and with grace. And I'm not looking at pointing the finger. I'm looking at myself and looking at how do we make things better, right? I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I want to make sure that all the stuff that works well in its intended use. And I want to find the new stuff that makes other things work better. Okay. So just kind of going back to, like you were saying, the story, how did I end up here? How did I end up doing this? And it's kind of the confluence of two different things in my life. And the first thing is the fact that straight up, man, I'm a blue collar guy. I wore the nice shirt for this. I'm a blue collar guy doing a white collar job. it's really actually funny. I mean, like, I'm a handyman. I build stuff, I fix stuff. All growing up, I was in high school, I did roofing work. When I was all through college, how I got through college, how I paid for it. I was a pool guy. I ran crews when I was 20 years old on, basically demoing gunite pools and rebuilding them. And so I'm really very practical. I'm like, if something's broken, let's fix it. So here I am. I get into the mental health field. I start doing therapy. All of a sudden, I'm looking at the lay of the land. I'm looking at the landscape out there, right? And you're going, wait a minute, why are they spending so much time teaching coping strategies? Uh, aren't we supposed to fix stuff? And why is it that when we prescribe a med, 8 hours later and the symptom comes back, aren't we just covering it? And I'm like, and again, I reckon I use this term with respect. My question had always been, why can't we talk about curing stuff? Okay, we don't do that in the mental health world. I recognize the reasons why, with humility, but it alliterates well. Coping, covering, cure. Yes, okay, but why can't we look at it and say we want to resolve stuff? So I'm thinking, like, if I'd have gone to somebody's house, somebody says to me, "Hey Jeff, I got a leak." I give them a tarp, I put it over the house, and then I give them a bucket and I say, okay, I've covered it over. And when it rains, put this bucket under the leak and cope with it. They would laugh me out of the industry. It doesn't work that way. So why do we settle for that standard in the mental health world?
Great analogy.
And then coming back to kind of like just a big part of my personality and my training, right? I'm a strategist. I'm the guy that I love to figure out why something is broken, get down to the component parts, and then fix it so that the system actually works well. That's what I do. And that goes really well with being a marriage and family therapist, right? As a marriage and family therapist, we all do the system stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Systems thinking means that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that each one of these parts of a system, an interactional system of relationships and people in a family, they interact in a particular way to get a specific outcome. Okay. And if your outcome is always arguing, always being upset, always feeling distant and having conflict in the relationship, well, then we need to look at the component parts. And if we can shift the interactional patterns, maybe we'll get a different outcome. And this is where I'm looking at the system, right? I'm looking at the individual component parts and I'm saying, if we've got this system, which is a really good system, right? We've got medication. Holy cow. Do you realize that back in the 1960s, 70s, we're just down the road from a place called Fairfield Hills. It used to be one of the largest asylums in the country. Okay. Within 10 years of the introduction of psychopharmaceutical products, that place just about emptied out. It's now been converted, a huge portion of it has been converted into like civic buildings and, community centers and stuff like that.
Big athletic center up there.
Beautiful, right? This is because of medications that were able to stabilize people that were in the psychiatric wards. Wow, what a gift, what a blessing that medicine has been. And I'm thankful for it. Okay, so like you said, not anti. So I'm going, this is here, but why is it that when a med doesn't work and multiple meds don't work and you do all these conglomeration of medications and people don't like the side effects and they don't want to be on them, well, why do we keep prescribing them? And the answer is because we don't know what else to do. That's really the answer. And then when you've got somebody that's going and they're doing mental health care, receiving counseling, and they've seen the same therapist for 12 years, and they tell me that they love their therapist. I'm going to get in trouble for this one too. But I've seen the same therapist for 12 years, and they say they're the greatest therapist ever. And I go, are you still anxious? Oh, yeah, I'm totally anxious. They just really helped me to, I'm like, great. Okay, so they help to stabilize you. But that's like going to a dentist saying, I've got a cavity and a toothache, and I see you every week for 10 years, and I still have it. What's wrong with this picture? Yeah. Right. And we accept that as the standard. And I said, so somehow, some way we need to go back to the component parts and we need to figure out what are we asking parts to do that they shouldn't be doing? Mm-hmm. And maybe are we missing parts? I'll be quiet.
Well, no, see, that's the thing too, is that, collaboration and continuity of care are so important. And maybe medication in certain cases is the stabilization that one needs to then be a platform for change, right? Sometimes, and it's interesting, you even think about it in talk-based modalities. There are people that I work with that already see somebody specifically for trauma, right? And so then what am I being brought in for? I'm being brought in to stabilize them on a weekly basis based on day-to-day stressors. So it's like I'm almost serving the role of medication in that client's case, but that requires collaboration between me and that other person. It is very interesting stuff, you know?
Yeah. And I almost envision this dichotomy as like, you don't use, a screwdriver to hammer in a nail. That's really hard. And I kind of envision that as like, right, therapy. Like I think we briefly touched on this in a couple episodes ago, but like when you're, when you have a polar bear outside trying to break into your house, it's really hard to teach somebody how to cope when they're constantly feeling like a bear's banging on their door and their life is threatened.
Yeah.
Right. And on the flip side of things, I kind of envision a hammer hammering in a screw. It technically works, but I see that kind of as medication where there's there is a better way in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cases in where it's so effective, right? Like when there's nails lined up, but as soon as you get to a screw, it could hurt the wood. How do we determine between a nail and a screw or something else entirely? And until now, that's been the DSM.
Yeah.
The DSM-5 has been a great tool in the mental health world. It's given us, right? We mentioned a few episodes ago again that it's helpful for us to conceptualize things by putting them into categories, right? However, I think when we look at them, the more and more we learn about the EEGs and the way the brain functions, it doesn't quite line up with the DSM.
Yeah. I mean, we're never going to discredit the value of a bandage to stop bleeding. And we're never going to say that it's not important to stop bleeding, but that's not going to cure an infection, right? So it's both are part of the process. Are we trying to acquire more things to manage in our lives, right? And I'm not saying that, coping skills are fantastic and it's great for people to take hold of their own well-being and have to take part in that through practice. But to think that you have to, acquire 3 different breathing techniques, 2 meditations that align with you, and a whole toolbox of things that you have to step away from work, step away from your kids, and step away from life to be able to implement. Well, we can do that to stop the bleeding. Are we going to do that forever? Right? Like, we don't want to promote that. We want resolution. We want people to go and live that optimal life without having to acquire more, whether it be coping skills, medications, or diagnoses.
Yeah. Which is not to say, right, there's not good things for coping mechanisms, breathing techniques, meditation. These are all good tools. However, the whole point that I was trying to make on this was, you don't want that to be the end game. Mm-hmm. You want that to be something that helps you to get through it when you need it. I use those tools. If I'm feeling stressed out, or if I wake up 3:00 in the morning and I can't fall back asleep and my heart starts racing, I'll start doing the breathing techniques. They're good things. But what we found with, for instance, with a neuroanalysis, in a lot of these cases, what you're doing with coping mechanisms is you're engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, which then de-escalates the central nervous system and the over-arousal features that are causing your heart to race and, your hands to go numb and for you to start feeling panicky and disoriented, right? You're reversing those things. And my whole thing is if we take a look at a brain, okay, here we go, looking at another tool that can be added into the system. What if we can actually see the racing thoughts? Let's just get rid of them. Yeah. Let's train the brain to get unstuck, not do it anymore, and to get rid of those things. So, what I was going to say too was, I think I feel like most of the time when I talk about this, I feel very self-conscious because I'm not trying to be critical to our partners in the field, right? That I'm very self-conscious of. I don't want to diminish it. We end up, spending an immense amount of time cultivating strong connections with other therapy groups in the region, with med prescribers. We do a lot of work with naturopathic doctors and other folks. We really want to make connections with people so that we can send people to those professionals to get the help that they need, and that we can work together, right?
Well,
That's something that we would talk about.
You bring up a very good point, Jeff, because I think that collaboration is important while competition is what tends to prevail in many different fields, right? So you have people that will take ownership of a client and oftentimes become oppositional with someone else that's in their care team. Whereas here, what we really try and do is build a treatment team, even though we're not all in the same office. So we work in tandem with psychiatrists and psychiatric APRNs and doctors. We maintain regular communication with them, because much like in previous episodes, we talked about the uniqueness of each person and their brain. What comes together as the puzzle that is the perfect treatment plan for them is also going to be unique in some ways, So considering all of those things is going to be a massive part of getting them to that end goal.
Yeah, and that's part of what we recommend is the solution. The way that we want to fix the system is having a more collaborative approach, where we're not threatened by what each person offers, but rather we recognize the significance of what each part contributes to the healing experience of the whole. And while we can kind of talk about it from the perspective of okay, are we being critical of the professionals? The reality is, there's almost nobody that comes into my office that doesn't immediately accept the premise that the system is broken. Okay, I feel like we've now gotten to that point. I said it's part of that tipping point, right? That's shifting us into the new paradigm. Almost every single person that comes in here is coming to us because the system failed them, because the system wasn't adequate to get to what they're dealing with. And I typically realize that if they've had medication failures and it was not successful, it's not the med's fault. It's the fact that it wasn't the right application of the right treatment to the right problem. And if the mental health counseling isn't working, I typically don't assume that it's because of a crummy therapist. No. It's probably because they're applying a care of the soul technique to something that's not a care of the soul problem. And that's where oftentimes people that come to our office are so much more likely to benefit from our services, because if it failed here and it failed there, it's very likely that what we do is going to be kind of like that little magic touch. So most of the folks that come in, I find, and I hope that the folks that are listening to this podcast, I have a feeling they're going to be sitting out there going, hallelujah, this is good. Finally, we're talking about this. Like I said in our first episode, when I talked to the hair cutter, and she was just like, absolutely, oh my gosh, I got to listen to the podcast. So call out if you're listening. Thanks for the haircut.
And kind of to take it also, for people that are listening, interested in improving their own mental health and, different avenues to explore. I'm sure there's also going to be a lot of mental health professionals that find their way to our podcast. And so, I encourage you guys to relate, reflect on the relationship you have with your clients' results, right? Like we all, like to think that we end up having good relationships with our clients, which is why they come back to see us. But I want you to look at the relationship you have with the results that they came to you for. Right? A lot of people can grow fond of another person. A lot of people can see the value in the moment to moment, but remember what they came in there for, right? And so when you start to consider those things, you start to say, all right, all we're trying to do is improve all of our results, right? And I've met so many clinicians that agree for many different reasons, right? Coming from a background in residential treatment, I watched it in the course of 6 or so years go from quality and individualized to quantity, a turnstile. Right. And as you start to bring quantity up in the field of mental health, you automatically are going to start to generalize more and try and fit people into boxes that are already established. The quality of care goes down,
And I think what's interesting about the DSM specifically, right? There's a presumption that whatever you tell your therapist is actually exactly how you're feeling, right? Like
reality for that
matter. Or reality for that matter,
Yeah.
right? And not to say that like people go in and they, lie about whatever intentionally. I know personally, I have a hard time just in a conversation with my wife having, the right words to say at the exact right moment. Sometimes that's really hard.
Yeah.
The amazing thing about what the EEG shows when we look at the brain is that it's so specific and it's objective. Right. We can see these biomarkers that are shared between people, but they're almost applied differently. Right. We can see that, beta spindles here and beta spindles there, and all these different things, they might apply differently to different people, but they're all a key part of this specific behavior, right? In the case of beta spindlings, it could be attention pops, it could be like an emotion outburst, it could be all these different things. It's really interesting to think about how we've operated under this for so long, and it's difficult because we've done it for so long to, I guess, unstuckify ourselves with the current system.
Good word.
I know we're making up words as we go along. To see, moment I didn't quite have the words, and unstuckify just came out.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's so hard to, we've worked our way into this system, and there's a gap, right? We see the gap. What I want to propose to you guys and ask you is, how does what we do fill that gap? Like, we've described what's missing, but how do we fill that?
Yeah, I like to conceptualize differently, right? And again, I'm kind of going back to this. If we're going to criticize the system, we really need to have some kind of a solution to what we ought to be thinking. And again, the DSM, I just don't think that it accurately categorizes. It's come under an immense amount of scrutiny within the last 5 to 10 years. There's a growing body of literature that's indicating that it was a good run. It was an effort to kind of create medicalized categories for psychological disorders, and we ended up, essentially, in some sense, pathologizing things that are rather normal for the human experience and that are just kind of frustrating or difficult, and haven't really fully recognized that by categorizing it, we lost track of where they were coming from. Right. And that's why, a lot of the problem with the DSM is, I always say, the problem is diagnostic categorization ignores symptom etiology. We're not looking at where they're coming from. We think that we've done the job once we've asked the questions, run the questionnaires, and then all of a sudden we go, check, 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 check. I have a generalized anxiety disorder. Yes. But the system falls apart when you get more complex cases. So when we take a look at clients, we're looking at it from the perspective of, where do these symptoms come from? I tend to, like I said, I like my I like my acronyms. I like working with, alliteration and all this kind of stuff. I work with S's, right? When I think about where symptoms can come from. And the bottom line is that they can come from kind of, anatomy or neuroanatomical problems. The bottom line is, right, we learned from that story about poor old Phineas Gage, a railroad worker back in the 1800s who was, packing black powder or whatever, the explosives, into a rock, and it sparked and it shot the crowbar straight up through his prefrontal cortex.
And it changed his personality.
And it completely changed his personality. So we realized that one of the ways in which symptoms can emerge, i.e., irritability, anger, impulsive outbursts, rage, change in personality, can simply be because there's damage to a part of your brain or something else. Okay, great. So that's going to really create an immense amount of pressure on the generation of a symptom and forcing it to emerge. Okay. Now you go up another level and you go, I call it soma, right? Soma as in the body. And then you go up a level, you get neurochemistry. And that's a real thing, right? If you don't have the correct hormones in your brain to allow for the transmission of an electrical current between neurons, okay, across the synaptic gap, you're going to have issues, right? They can generate more anxiety or less anxiety.
Yeah. And real quick, for those who have not studied a lot of neuroscience, just describe, so the way in which, what you're talking about, the way in which neurons interact with each other, right? There's this thing called the synapse. It's essentially like a space in between to simplify it a little bit, the sender and the receiver part of the neuron.
Yeah,
right?
they're the
It's like
junction points in the pipes.
Exactly.
They're where
So-
you can distribute and go different directions.
Exactly. And what you're saying is, right, a lot of the neurochemistry has to deal with those transmitters that jump between neurons.
Correct.
Right?
Yep. And it's a fundamentally different process than the actual electrical current that runs down an axon. Okay.
We had a good discussion about this.
We had a discussion. I said most people don't realize and don't think about this, but this is a debate that's been going on for decades. That's the difference between what we call the soup, right? We said there's soma, there's neurochemistry, which is the soup, the neurochemistry, and then there's the spark. Now, the soup and the spark are interrelated in how the brain functions. I like to use the imagery of picture it like a highway system, but there's all kinds of waterways and we don't have bridges. So we need ferries to bring us apart to the other side. And every time you cross, you've got it. That's where you get a juncture. That's where you get the decision of, am I going to go, west to Albuquerque? Am I going to go north to Canada? Or am I going to head east to Connecticut? Okay. So which way am I going to go? And so when you cross the ferry, that's the soup. That's the neurochemistry that guides in a lot of the direction making. And then you've got the neurons, which are like the highways. They're different systems. They're interconnected. They work together, but they're different. And the reality is that we started to learn about the spark back in the 1960s. We really began to understand that we could train these things. We began to realize that this actually made sense. Get into this, I think, a little bit more in the next one. I think that'll be the next week that we get into more of these stories. But again, when it comes to symptom emergence, you can have symptoms emerge because the soup is messed up, and you can have problems because how the brain regulates the electrical current, the rhythms of it get messed up. Okay. And then you've got above that, you've got the soul. And the soul has a lot to do with our values, our beliefs, our convictions. It has to do with our resilience. It has to do with the world that we grew up in and the fundamental assumptions we have about the world and how we choose to deal with it. And so when it comes back and we look at how do we create a treatment plan, my whole gist is let's figure out, not again, like the diagnostic category, let's maybe start to figure out, okay, if we have racing thoughts, why are they there? Where is it? Is it coming from the soma? Probably not. Is it coming from the soup? Actually, probably not. But when you take a look at the EEG, you go, is it coming from the spark? Ooh, baby, do we have a lot of evidence of that. We got biomarkers showing racing thoughts. But then let's take a look at further at the life and say, okay, now in the care of the soul, what's going on in this person's life? Okay, because maybe they have racing thoughts because they're really struggling in their marriage. Or maybe a kid's struggling with his identity. Or maybe a girl is getting bullied in school. Okay, guess what? We can actually treat these things by addressing the care of the soul and by addressing the spark. And when we do those things together, we get stunning outcomes. So I think a big part of the system is figuring out that we actually are, at this point in time, getting better at figuring out where these things are coming from. Sorry, I just waxed long.
Yeah, it was worth it though, because you're putting a very, very appropriately pretty bow on the paradigm shift, and I can't help but see it from a very similar perspective in that, like, when people come in and we have this big fat purple book on our desk called the DSM, and they hit you with a gamut of symptoms. Those symptoms are the things that are affecting them negatively. Yeah. Those symptoms are what are interrupting their peace and their happiness. And so when we can target those symptoms with a deeper understanding of their origin, via, investigating the spark, right? Well, suppose that same person walks into a different office at the end of treatment, and those are not impacting their life in a significant way, and they report it honestly as such, they may not get that same diagnosis, because stigmatism based on diagnosis is a big part of the broken system that I think many, many mental health professionals across different practices will agree on. I have people that come to me that have really leaned into their label more than it's ever been pushed on them, right? It gives them an opportunity to dislike themselves. It gives them an opportunity to fit a mold that isn't pretty. So by attacking the symptoms, we're attacking the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a personality test, right? Like, have you ever met one of those person that's like, well, I can't help it because I'm an INTJ, or I'm a one wing too. Like, you know, I think the idea of a personality test is not to tell you how you black and white function every day.
Yeah.
It's to inform you, hey, here's your predisposition to do this, and use that as a tool to move forward, right? You can't take that as gospel, you know? And I think to an extent, the DSM is almost the same way. Well, I can't help it because I have ADHD. Yeah. Well, you can help it. It's just harder for you than it is for, you know, Jimmy in the same class that just sits next to you.
Right.
You know, it's just different things. And one of the things I love about what we do here, and you know, with the EEG, I get asked this all the time when I run QEEGs on people. They ask, "Wait, but I'm not feeling anxious today." And I'm like, "Well, okay, cool." And they're like, "Wait, but you need to be able to pick up my anxiety." No,
it's always there.
It is always there. So when we talk about these biomarkers, something to note is that it's not a like the bio. In most cases, it's not like the biomarker happens and that makes you anxious, right? That's not the reason you become anxious, or the you know, that, you know, whatever the case may be. It's a predisposition to feeling these things when your environment triggers it, right? Yeah. So I don't know, Jeff, do you want to tag on that a little bit?
Statistically, we only need 90 seconds of a person's EEG to generate a statistically valid and reliable presentation of what your brain looks like all the time.
90
now
seconds.
That's amazing. And obviously we take a bit more of that, but it gives us more stuff. The only exception to that is going to be some of our instability features. For instance, okay, and this is an extreme example of a pathology, an actual medical problem, which would be a seizure. Yeah. So you're not always having a seizure. You only have a seizure when you see that you're having a seizure. And so that's not really a part of the baseline. But you know, that's kind of the valid point though, is your features, the normal characteristics that we're working with, the normal features that we're looking to train are typically very present, and we'll almost certainly see them in that EEG.
Wait, and you mentioned 90 seconds. We record for 12 minutes total.
Yeah.
So like in that time, the odds that we miss something, like you said, outside of a very rare circumstance,
other than paroxysms or epileptiform discharges.
Exactly. The odds we.
I just wanted to sound smart. That's, you know.
Fun discharges. Sounded more than smart.
Oh boy.
Interesting story on that front, Jeff, and this isn't from that long ago, but we had somebody who on a third QEEG, I believe, because they were tired, showed a paroxysm in a region where we were finally able to pinpoint where these really, really upsetting facial tics were coming from. Yep. Really disturbed this person based on their career and based on their lifestyle. And when their brain was tired enough, it showed a feature where we were able to start targeting it very, very precisely. And to me, that's the amazing things that can come from, you know, what we do and how we do it differently.
Yeah, we just had another client too, where same kind of a scenario where this child was having really like extreme explosions of rage outbursts, like just totally losing it, becoming violent. And there just wasn't anything in the EEG that was consistent that we had seen in the first two EEGs with that kind of a presentation. And then that we did, like, again, I think it was the third one that we had run. So it was the second or the third. And boom, we saw these what are called paroxysmal discharges, which are a bit more of a real explosion, but you get those and you're going to get a significant dysregulation that's going on. And I mean emotional dysregulation, mood instability. And we finally were able to see it. And it actually changes very much about the way that you're thinking about treating it at that point, because at that point, now you want to refer them on to a neurologist. Now you want the neurologist to take a look at that and decide whether or not you need to treat that with medicine. Yeah. Makes a huge difference in terms of treatment planning.
What does a professional who's listening to this, what do they do with all this information? And the second part to it is, what does somebody at home, somebody who may struggle with, hey, I kind of identify with those. I feel like I have rage outbursts and they kind of just come out of nowhere. And, what does that person do?
Well, really, like, starting from the professional standpoint, we're looking to connect. We're looking to be a resource, whether that be, a resource in terms of pairing you with somebody on the other side of the country that provides a service that we see the professional quality that we would, attest to, right? Providing information so that you can make the best decisions for the people that you work with. I think that we want to make ourselves known so that we can be best used to help your people as well, right? And that's my message to the professionals. And as far as any other listener out there, if there's ever been a moment where you've even stepped towards dysregulation, then this information pertains to you. If you've tried medication or have not seen results, or have been afraid to try it, we are an option for you to explore. Like Jeff said earlier, you might love your therapist, but if you've been going for a decade and you still see some of the reasons you went in the first place, we may be a good add-on, right? We're not trying to tell anybody to change anything and get rid of things that are good for them. We're just saying maybe we can be an addition that leads to better results.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Changing the game from settling and coping to, creating real change.
Yeah.
Hope, healing, and wholeness. That's our motto here.
Yep.
Right?
And I want professionals to keep doing what they do.
Absolutely.
There is no reason, like EMDR, absolutely necessary. Talk-based counseling, so necessary, right? There's still a place for the use of medications. Okay, none of that is going away. Never. I don't see it anytime in the future that really doesn't have it. What we're talking about is all of the supplemental stuff that's now adding to. We're looking at all of these things, this big space that's been missed that now is getting filled in. We're figuring all of this stuff out. So, my whole thing to other professionals is to say, I want you to recognize that if you've got clients that are just mystifying to you, if you've got ones that nothing is working, then start to consider other referrals, right? Because it's in the best interest of the client. It's not in the best interest of our companies. We got to stop thinking that. I mean, I don't want people to think that way at all, right? I want it in the best interest of our clients. So, and recognize that there is a big change coming, which I think is really good news to anybody that's out there that isn't listening to us because of they're a professional. Here's the brilliant part of this is there is now a whole new level of hope. There's a way that you can get help and healing and move forward in your life that was never, ever there before. It's a whole new game. And if you tried the other stuff, good news is the likelihood, if the other ones didn't work, there's a good chance that it's going to be falling into the zone of the spark.
Yeah. And just to add to that a little bit too, there is a very, very real, just to add to what you said, there's a very real aspect of that as a professional to retain your clients, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned that very briefly, and I want to touch on that because my role here at the Nervation Center is a lot of our marketing and networking, and I like working with people. I love doing neurofeedback, but I also have a lot of that business mind. And in the mental health profession, it's very interesting because it's profitable to keep people attached. It is. It's proven. That's why, we have people that come, and especially in a system where, if insurance covers your therapy and you're not paying very much at all, if anything, why don't you go for 10 years?
Well, that's one of the number one problems and concerns that most consumers of medications have with pharmaceuticals. It doesn't give you an exit strategy. Once on a med, always on a med. And that works for a pharmaceutical. And again, I feel like I have a love-hate relationship on this because on the one hand, I know that it's a good thing, but I really do not appreciate the idea that we're going to put people on meds for their entire lives. There's a lot of complications with this, and people are not appropriately given informed consent when they are put onto medications. In other words, people are never given adequate information about the potential side effects, the implications, what it means to be on a med, how long they're going to be on it. Most people do not take the time to really fully explain it so that a person can make an informed decision for themselves. And then they get on it, and then they're never allowed to come off of it. It's never the recommendation. Rarely, I should say.
Right. And to kind of bookend it with, coming back to, I started with, no finish lines. Right. But, here we have something where if somebody is looking for results and finish lines continue to move further and further out, they're going to end up losing hope. Right. And, when we're trying to, give people the strength to move forward and make positive change in their lives, we need to see things happen. And that's what the shift is all about. So
I think, and that gets back to, okay, and maybe this is a good place to end on is, there's 4 things. I'm going to see if I can remember them all that I think about when it comes to the paradigm shift and what it means to correct the system. Okay. Yeah. This is the solution. Number 1, we want to be focused on outcomes, not on dependency, right? We want people to be free of the things that are preventing them from living fully the life that they want. So outcomes need to become a criteria for whether or not we're doing a good job. Okay. Number 2, we've always said, okay, over and over again, it's not about diagnostic categories, it's about symptom etiology. Where's the symptom coming from? Because if you know where it's coming from, you can create good treatment plans and get better outcomes. A third thing that we're looking at is genuinely want to connect with each other, right? Mm-hmm. Of making sure that once we figure out where the problems are coming from, we can send people in the right place. That collaboration is the new competition, is the phrase that they have out there, that we want to work together in order to do it. And ultimately, I think that we do want to put our clients first, make it highly personalized, highly focused on their care, make it focused on them. It's not about me. I'd rather, and this is straight up how I think, I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I really want to work myself out of a job. Yeah. I will tell you right now that if in 5 years I was able, and it's never going to happen, I get it, but I'm just making the point. If you were to tell me that 5 years from now, I could retire and finish out my life roofing because every single person that ever came into my office was literally restored to fullness of life, I would joyfully roof again.
Hey, I'll join you. Vince, you in?
Let's do it.
Let's go. I'm afraid of heights, but it's good.
You guys at home, let's work us out of a job and we'll roof.
Let's do it.
We'll start a roofing company somewhere. But yeah, so hey, if you guys at home enjoyed the show, if you learned something today, would you leave us a like, a comment, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, all the things. We would really, really, really appreciate your support. And leave a comment if you have any questions. If you want to interact with us, we're going to be keeping an eye on the comment section. Like, we want to interact with you, answer questions, give you resources, all the things. So we're looking forward to seeing you guys. Well, I guess not seeing you guys, but we're looking forward to
being seen by you.
I'm cool.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I'll see him.
Yeah, we'll see him.
Come on by.
Come on by anytime. You get a tour. It'll be great. But it was great spending some time with you guys, and I'm really excited for our next episode, which is talking about what the heck is neurofeedback.
Neurofeedback.
We're finally getting into it. We've staged what it looks like, or the problems that we've ran into in the field, and here is the answer to those problems. How does it work? How does it work? What does it look like? All the things. So yeah, have a great week. And we will talk to you again soon.